On my 67th birthday, a box appeared on my porch. Mahogany polished, lined with gold trim as if it had been chosen with care. No return address. Just a card with 2 words, "Happy Birthday." But I knew that handwriting. My daughter Emily's. We hadn't spoken in years. Inside the box were 10 Cuban cigars, rare and extravagant, the kind a father might once have bragged about to his friends. Except Emily never cared that I quit smoking 2 years ago after pneumonia nearly stole my breath. She never asked about my lungs. She never asked about me. So I handed the cigars to Richard Hale, her father-in-law, an old friend who still smoked. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was Emily's way of remembering me again. But the next day, Richard collapsed, gasping for air. The doctors said it wasn't an illness, it was poison. And in that moment, the truth cut deeper than the disease ever had. My daughter hadn't remembered me. She had only remembered what she stood to gain when I was gone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. I stood beside Richard's bed watching the rise and fall of his chest as machines clicked and hummed. Tubes ran from his arms, monitors blinked. He was alive, but barely. His wife sat in the corner, her hands shaking around a styrofoam cup of coffee. "Jack," she whispered, her voice breaking. They said it wasn't his heart. They said it was something he smoked. My stomach twisted. The image of that mahogany box flashed in my mind. Emily's handwriting. The cigars. I gave them to him, I admitted quietly. They came to me first. Her eyes widened, horrified. "You... then..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I left the hospital that night with more questions than answers. The November air cut through my jacket as I walked to my truck. Every breath burned a little like the memory of my pneumonia years ago. I hadn't touched tobacco since. Emily knew that. Or she should have. Why would she send them? Why now after years of silence? At home, I set the empty mahogany box on the kitchen table. The gold trim glimmered under the light, mocking me. I picked up the card again, just 2 words. "Happy Birthday." No signature, no warmth, just handwriting I couldn't mistake. Sharp, deliberate, like Emily herself. Memories pressed in on me, her as a little girl, hair in braids, laughing as she ran across the yard. The way she used to sit on my lap while I smoked a cigar on summer evenings, pretending she was drawing maps on my chest with her finger. That child was gone. In her place stood a woman I barely recognized, one who hadn't called me dad in years. I sat there until midnight staring at that box. The house was quiet, too quiet. Since her mother passed, silence had become my only companion. Finally, I picked up the phone. The next morning, I walked into the local police station. Detective Morales, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority, met me in the lobby. "You're saying your daughter sent you cigars and the man who smoked them is in the ICU," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes." My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling. Doctors said it wasn't an illness, said it was poison, and that box, I slid it across her desk. That's where they came from. She studied it carefully, lifting the lid, sniffing the wood. Then she leaned back. "We'll run tests. But Mr. Carter, this is a serious accusation. Are you sure your daughter sent them?" "I know her handwriting," I said coldly. "A father never forgets." Morales nodded slowly, jotting something in her notebook. "We'll need to confirm." That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like a whisper. Every shadow seemed to carry her face. I sat in my recliner staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly Emily had stopped being my daughter and started being whatever she was now. At 2 a.m. the phone rang. It was Richard's wife. "They say he's stable," she said, relief flooding her voice. "But they confirmed it wasn't natural. The doctors think it was something in the cigar." My heart sank. I thanked her and hung up. I walked to the porch, lit by the weak glow of the security lamp, and looked out at the dark yard. The night was silent, except for the distant bark of a dog. I clenched the railing with both hands. "Emily, why would you try to erase me?" 2 days later, Detective Morales called. "We ran tests," she said. "The cigars were laced with aconitine. It's a rare plant toxin, extremely lethal even in small doses." I said nothing. Mr. Carter, she continued, is there any reason your daughter would want you dead? The question echoed in my chest. Images flickered Emily asking about my pension years ago, her casual remarks about my life insurance, the way she distanced herself after her marriage, only reaching out when money was involved. She has her reasons, I murmured. Morales' tone sharpened. We need to hear them. Later that week, Emily called. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. Did you get my gift? I froze, gripping the receiver until my knuckles whitened. Yes, I did. She hesitated, then asked, Did you try one? No, I said evenly. I gave them to Richard. A long pause, then a laugh, high and brittle. Well, I suppose that works too. Something in her tone sent chills down my spine. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, replaying every word. The next Sunday, I drove past her house. I told myself it was a coincidence that I was just taking the long way home. But when I saw her car in the driveway, shiny and new, I couldn't help but wonder how much of that was bought with patience and how much with calculation. In the window, I saw her silhouette laughing with her husband. She looked happy, carefree, as if she hadn't just sent her father a box of death. I didn't knock. I just sat there in the truck until the sun dipped behind the trees, then drove away. That night, I pulled out the old folder where I kept my financial documents, life insurance policies, the deed to the house, retirement savings, all neatly filed. I stared at the papers, suddenly aware of how much they meant not to me, but to her. She hadn't asked about my health in years, but she'd asked about these, about beneficiaries, about coverage amounts. Maybe she hadn't forgotten me. Maybe she had been planning for me to be gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of police visits, hospital updates, and sleepless nights. Morales pressed me for details, dates, conversations, anything that could tie Emily to intent. I gave her everything I remembered. Meanwhile, Richard slowly recovered, though his voice was weaker, his laugh quieter. One afternoon, I visited him. You're lucky, Jack, he rasped, trying to smile. If you hadn't quit smoking, we'd be planning your funeral instead of mine. I forced a smile, but my heart felt heavy. Lucky, that's what they called it. But luck had nothing to do with it. It was survival. And survival, I realized, would require more than luck. It would require patience. Because Emily had made her move. Now it was my turn. When Detective Morales asked me why my daughter might want me dead, I didn't answer right away. How do you explain years of silence, of slights that seemed small in the moment but cut deeper over time? How do you put into words that the little girl you once carried on your shoulders now looks at you like an obstacle instead of a father? I sat there in her office, staring at the dull beige walls, and thought back to the last real conversation Emily and I had before it all fell apart. It was 3 years ago, not long after her wedding. She came to my house, her husband in tow, both of them dressed, sharp smiles too wide. They sat at my kitchen table where her mother used to lay out Sunday dinners and slid a stack of papers across to me. Dad. Emily said, her voice sugary, we've found a house. It's perfect for us. We just need a little help with the down payment. I remember looking at those papers, the numbers printed bold, more zeros than I'd ever seen in my own savings account. Emily, I said, calm but firm. I can't give you that kind of money. Not all at once. I'm retired. I live on a fixed income. Her smile faltered. Her husband Daniel leaned forward, his tone sharper. But you have assets. The house, your pension, the life insurance. You don't even need all of it. I stared at him, then at her. That money is for my medical bills, for me to live. And one day, yes, whatever's left will go to you. But not now. Not like this. Emily's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. You're saying you'd rather cling to your savings than help me build a life. I wanted to tell her it wasn't about clinging. It was about survival. But in that moment, I realized she didn't see me as her father anymore. She saw me as a vault that wouldn't open. She left that day without hugging me, without even looking back. Back in Morales' office, I finally said, she asked me for money once. I couldn't give it. She didn't forgive me. Morales tapped her pen thoughtfully. People kill for less. Her words were clinical, detached, but they stabbed me all the same. That night, I sat on the porch with an old blanket draped over my shoulders, listening to the wind rattle the trees. Pneumonia had left me weaker lungs, scarred every breath, a reminder that my time was already shorter than most. I thought about Emily's gift, the cigars, and the truth was inescapable. She wasn't just impatient, she was done waiting. But I couldn't stop thinking about the little girl she used to be. I remember one Christmas when she was 8. Money was tight. I could only afford one real gift, a used bicycle I'd found at a garage sale and repainted in the garage late at night. When she saw it, her face lit up like fireworks. She hugged me so tight my ribs ached. "It's perfect, Daddy," she whispered. How does a child who once clung to you like that grow into a woman who signs your death warrant with her handwriting? A week later, Morales called again. "We can't prove who laced the cigars," she said. "No fingerprints, no DNA, just your word about the handwriting." "My word is enough," I snapped. "Not in court," she said, voice steady. "Not yet." The line went quiet, but her words lingered like smoke. I drove to the cemetery the next day. My wife's grave was there, the headstone weathered but clean. I knelt brushing leaves from the base and whispered, "Martha, I don't know what happened to her. I don't know how our little girl turned into this." The wind answered for her, cold and empty. That evening I decided to test Emily. I dialed her number, my hand trembling on the receiver. "Emily," I said when she answered. "Dad." Her tone was smooth, careful. "I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" I asked. "Of course. How are you feeling? Did you enjoy your birthday?" I paused. I did, though it was nearly my last. Silence, just for a beat. Then she laughed. "Dad, you sound so dramatic." "It was just a gift." I pressed. "A gift I didn't use. Richard did. And now he's barely alive." Another silence, heavier this time. Then she said, cold as glass, "Well, maybe he should have known better." I swallowed hard. "Emily, what's happened to you?" But she hung up. For hours after I sat in the dark, the phone still in my hand. Those words replayed in my head. Maybe he should have known better. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't denial. It was a calculation. And I knew then that Richard was never the target. I was. The following Sunday, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store, a woman named Carol who had known Emily since she was a girl. "How's Emily?" she asked brightly. I forced a smile. "She's busy." Carol nodded. "Always was ambitious. I saw her last week, drove by in a new car. Must be doing well." I clenched my teeth. Of course she was doing well. She'd married into money, charmed her way into a wealthy family. But still she wanted more. My more. That night, I pulled out my will. I hadn't updated it in years. Emily was still listed as the sole beneficiary. My chest tightened. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide the future. I met with my lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, a week later. He was an old man himself, glasses sliding down his nose as he shuffled papers. "You're thinking of changing your will?" he asked. "Yes." My voice was steady, effective immediately. He looked at me carefully. "May I ask why I didn't answer directly?" Instead I said, "Because the person I trusted to care for me one day has already tried to bury me." Jacobs blinked, then nodded slowly. "Understood. Who do you want listed instead?" I thought for a long moment. Richard came to mind. His family, maybe even a foundation. Anyone but her. "Not Emily," I said finally. Anyone but her. The twist came that same evening. As I drove home from Jacobs's office, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. A car was tailing me too close, too steady. I turned onto a side street. The car turned too. My pulse quickened. I pulled into my driveway, watching as the car slowed at the corner, then disappeared. Coincidence, maybe. But in my gut, I knew better. That night, I dreamed of the bicycle again, the one I painted red for Emily when she was 8. Only this time in the dream, she rode it away from me and never looked back. When I woke, the sun was just rising. My house felt colder than ever. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring at the mahogany box still sitting there, empty but heavy with meaning. Emily had played her hand. But she didn't know mine. Not yet. And as I sipped the bitter coffee, I made myself a quiet promise I would not let her win. Not with my money, not with my life, not with my name. The morning after I changed my will, I found a note slipped under my front door. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper with my name scrawled across the top. Dad, it read, "I think we should talk. Emily." The handwriting was the same sharp, deliberate style as on the cigar box. My stomach tightened. She hadn't left me a birthday card out of love. She'd left me a trap, and now she wanted to meet. For a moment, I considered tearing the note in half, but another thought crept in. Maybe this was the opening I needed. Not to reconcile, but to see her clearly without the filters of memory or nostalgia. So I called her. Her voice was honeyed cautious. "Dad, I'm glad you called. You wanted to talk," I said. "Yes. Dinner tomorrow night. Neutral ground." Neutral ground. That phrase struck me, as if she were negotiating with an enemy, not inviting her father. Still, I agreed. The next evening, I drove to a small Italian restaurant on the edge of town. She was already there, sitting by the window, a glass of wine untouched in front of her. She looked every bit the successful daughter, perfect hair, tailored dress, a diamond on her hand that could blind a man in sunlight. "Dad," she said with a practiced smile, "you look good." I sat folding my hands to hide their tremor. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes." She leaned forward. "I feel terrible that we've been distant. Life is short. I don't want regrets." Her words were smooth, but her eyes flicked to my watch, to the pen in my pocket, to anything that glittered. I nodded slowly. "Regrets." She sipped her wine, then said softly, "You know, Dad, I've been worried about you, living alone. What if something happens? You should think about arrangements to make things easier." There it was, the play. "I've already thought about it," I said. "I just updated my will." For the first time, her mask cracked, a flicker of panic, then gone. "Oh, well, that's good," she said too quickly. "That's responsible." I held her gaze. "You don't need to worry about me, Emily. I've taken care of everything." Silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Finally, she smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's all I wanted, Dad, to know you're okay." I left that dinner with the bitter taste of marinara still on my tongue, but also with confirmation. She hadn't invited me to heal wounds. She had wanted to probe, to measure, and she had learned something she didn't expect. She no longer held the key to my estate. That night, I pulled out my insurance policy. Martha and I had taken it out decades ago when Emily was still in pigtails. Back then, she was the sole beneficiary because who else would it be? But now, the thought of her cashing that check with a smile chilled me. The next morning, I drove to the insurance office, sat across from a young man with slicked back hair and eager eyes. "You want to change your beneficiary?" he asked. "Yes." "May I ask to whom Richard Hale?" I said without hesitation. The man blinked. "Your friend. He almost died because of a gift meant for me. He deserves something if I can't be here to give it myself." The pen scratched against the paper as I signed the forms. My chest felt lighter as I slid them back across the desk. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just waiting for the next blow. I was moving pieces of my own. A week later, Emily showed up at my door. "Dad," she said, forcing a brightness into her voice. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then opened the door. She looked around my modest living room as if appraising it. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "Thought I'd stop by." I gestured to the chair. "Sit." She perched delicately, crossing her legs, her perfume strong enough to choke a weaker man. "Dad, I've been thinking, maybe I was too harsh before. Asking for help, I mean. I understand you have your own needs." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She smiled, tilting her head. "Of course. But I also think families should support each other. I'd do the same for you." The lie was so smooth I almost admired it. I leaned forward. "Emily, let's stop pretending. You didn't bring me cigars because you cared. You brought them because you hoped I'd smoke them." Her face froze, just for a second. Then she laughed light and hollow. "Dad, that's ridiculous. Is it Richard nearly died?" She waved a hand. "Accidents happen." I stood. Not this kind of accident. For the first time, her mask cracked fully. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed. "You're paranoid," she hissed. "You've always been paranoid. No wonder, Mom." She stopped herself. Too late. I felt the words like a blade. No wonder, Mom. She had been about to twist the knife deeper. I exhaled slowly. Get out, Emily. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she stood, grabbed her purse, and left without another word. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the mahogany cigar box in front of me, empty but still heavy. I thought of Emily as a child falling asleep on my chest after story time. I thought of her teenage years slamming doors, calling me old-fashioned. I thought of her wedding, the way she smiled at Daniel but never looked back at me. And then I thought of her tonight, venom dripping from her words. I realized something, then this wasn't just about money. Emily resented me for living, for lasting longer than she wanted, and that meant she wouldn't stop. So I began to plan. Not with fists, not with rage, but with patience, precision, and the tools Emily could never understand: law, paper, and time. I called Jacobs again. One more thing, I said. I want to set up a trust. Ironclad. Emily doesn't see a cent. Jacobs chuckled grimly. Sounds like war. No, I said. It's survival. The twist came 2 days later. A letter arrived in the mail, official looking. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Mr. Carter, it read. We represent Emily Hale. This is to inform you of her intent to pursue guardianship proceedings, citing concerns about your mental competency. I stared at the words until they blurred. Guardianship. She wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was trying to declare me unfit to live. The letter shook in my hand long after I'd finished reading it. Petition for guardianship. Concerns of declining mental competency. Those weren't just words on paper. They were a blade sharpened and polished by my daughter. Guardianship. If she succeeded, she wouldn't need to wait for my will or my life insurance. She would own my life while I was still breathing. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where Martha and I used to play cards on quiet evenings. I whispered to the empty chair across from me. She's trying to bury me alive. The next morning, I marched into Jacob's office. He took one look at my face and pushed aside the stack of files on his desk. Tell me, he said. I handed him the letter. His lips moved silently as he read. Then he leaned back with a long sigh. Guardianship. That's bold and ugly. She wants to prove I'm incompetent, I said, my voice low. She wants the court to strip me of my own decisions. Jacobs tapped the paper. Don't underestimate her, Jack. These petitions can be dangerous. If she brings in doctors, neighbors, even receipts of mistakes, judges take them seriously. What mistakes? I asked sharply. He hesitated. Tell me honestly. Have you had lapses? Forgetting Bill's medication, leaving the stove on. I clenched my jaw. I'm 67, not senile. I remember more than she ever gave me credit for. Jacobs leaned forward. Then we fight. But carefully. This isn't about anger, it's about evidence. If she wants to build a case against you, we'll build one stronger for you. That week, Emily began her performance. Neighbors stopped by with odd stories. Mrs. Patterson from across the street. Your daughter mentioned you've been confused lately. Said you left your front door wide open all night. A pharmacist squinting at me, Emily told us you sometimes forget your prescriptions. We've been advised to keep an eye out. And at church, whispers traveled like wildfire. Such a shame. Poor Jack isn't all there anymore. Good thing Emily's stepping in. It was a campaign as methodical as any election. She wasn't just poisoning cigars. She was poisoning reputations. I kept a journal. Every conversation, every visit, every detail. Dates, times, names. If she wanted to drag me into court, I'd bring the truth bound in leather. One evening as I wrote at the kitchen table, the phone rang. I picked up, expecting Jacobs. It was Emily. Dad, she said, her tone sweet as syrup. I heard you've been having trouble. Bill's medicine. Doors unlocked. Funny, I replied. I heard the same thing. Wonder where those rumors started. Silence. Then in a voice sharp as glass, she said, You can make this easy, you know. Just sign over the power of attorney. You won't have to go through the embarrassment of a hearing. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from my chest in months. Embarrassment. Emily, the only embarrassment here is you. She hung up. The hearing came 2 weeks later. The courthouse smelled of old wood and stale coffee. I wore my best suit, the one Martha had pressed for me before her last Sunday service. Jacob stood at my side, steady as a lighthouse. Emily arrived with her lawyer, a sleek man in a $1,000 suit who looked like he hadn't missed a meal in years. Emily herself wore black as though she were already mourning me. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, opened the session. Petition for guardianship over Mr. Jack Carter. Ms. Hale, you may begin. Emily rose gracefully. Your Honor. My father has been declining. He forgets basic tasks, leaves his home unsecured, neglects his health. I fear for his safety. She gestured to her lawyer, who produced papers and affidavits, testimony from neighbors, records from his pharmacy, even statements from family friends. Whispers filled the courtroom. The judge turned to me. Mr. Carter, how do you respond? I stood slowly, the weight of every year in my spine but none in my voice. Your Honor, I may not be young, but I am not incompetent. I have managed my home, my finances, and my health with more care than my daughter ever managed her marriage. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's face flushed red. I held up my leather journal. I have documented every interaction since she began this campaign. Dates, times, exact words, neighbors pressured, pharmacists misled, a slander machine designed not to protect me, but to control me. Jacob stepped forward, handing the judge copies of my will, updates, my insurance changes, and my medical records, all neatly in order. This is not a man incapable of managing his affairs. This is a man targeted by greed. The judge skimmed the papers, her brow tightening. Then she looked at Emily. Ms. Hale, it is unusual for a daughter to seek guardianship of a parent who maintains this level of organization and independence. I see more evidence of calculation on your part than decline on his. Emily's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Petition denied, she declared. The gavel struck like thunder. Outside the courtroom, Emily cornered me. Her mask was gone now, replaced by a sneer. You think this is over? She hissed. You think one ruling will stop me? I met her eyes, steady and calm. It won't stop you, Emily, but it will slow you down. And every day you waste chasing my death, I'll be living. Her lips trembled with rage. You'll regret this. No, I said, stepping past her. You will. That night I sat on my porch, the cool air brushing my face. For the first time in months, I breathed without the weight of suspicion pressing against my chest. But peace was fleeting. Because I knew Emily. She didn't accept defeat. She adapted. And as the stars blinked overhead, I realized the war wasn't over. It had only shifted battlefields. If she couldn't take me through the courts, she would find another way, and I had to be ready. The envelope looked ordinary, but ordinary things often carry the deepest cuts. I slid it open with my old pocket knife, the one Martha had given me for our 10th anniversary. Inside was a letter from my bank. Confirmation of transfer, it read. Property deed reassigned, signature verified. My hand froze on the page. Transfer signature, I hadn't signed a thing. I pulled the paper closer, studying the scrawled name at the bottom. It was mine, or at least it pretended to be. The loops, the curves, they mimicked decades of checks and receipts. But it wasn't my hand. It was hers. Emily. She had forged me. I drove straight to the bank, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles burned white. The branch manager, a young man with perfect hair and no sense of history in his eyes, greeted me with a smile that faded as soon as I laid the letter on his desk. I never authorized this, I said, my voice flat. That is not my signature. He studied it, then glanced at me nervously. Mr. Carter, it went through all verification channels. The notary confirmed it. We even have a witness statement. Witness, I asked. Who? He shuffled papers. Your daughter, Emily Hale. I let out a bitter laugh. So, the witness to my signature was the very person who forged it. His face paled. Sir, if that's true, it is true, and if this bank doesn't reverse it immediately, you'll be defending yourself in court alongside her. Back in Jacob's office, I dropped the letter on his desk. He adjusted his glasses, scanning every word. She's clever, he muttered. Forgery, false witness, notary manipulation. This isn't a desperate child, Jack. This is calculated fraud. I nodded grimly. She wants me stripped bare. If guardianship failed, she'll starve me out instead. Jacobs leaned back. We can fight this, but we'll need proof beyond handwriting. Financial forensics, paper trails, the kind of details most people overlook. Details I repeated softly. That's where I live. That night I opened the old filing cabinet in my study. Decades of documents meticulously kept. Martha used to tease me about my obsession with keeping receipts from as far back as the 70s. But now, every slip of paper felt like a soldier in an army I'd been quietly building my whole life. I laid out samples of my true signature mortgage payments, tax returns, even the card I'd signed for Martha's last hospital admission. Then I compared them to the forgery. The difference was subtle but fatal. I pressed harder at the tail of my K. Emily's version trailed off weak and uncertain. My T always crossed with 2 deliberate strokes. Hers sagged like a tired branch. To a stranger it was close enough. To me it was a stranger wearing my face. The next day, Jacobs and I sat across from a forensic handwriting expert. She was a small woman with eyes that saw too much. She examined the signatures with a magnifier, tracing every line. "This isn't yours," she said finally. "Not even close." It's deliberate mimicry, but the tremors in the strokes, she was anxious under pressure. Whoever forged this was trying to be perfect, and in trying revealed themselves. Jacob smiled grimly. "That's what I needed to hear. We'll subpoena the notary records too. If Emily roped someone into this, we'll drag them into the light." I thought I was prepared, but nothing prepared me for the confrontation that came a week later. I was walking back from church when Emily's car pulled up beside me. She rolled down the window, her smile sharp as a blade. "Dad," she called. "Need a ride? Or are you still capable of walking on your own?" I kept moving. She pulled alongside, persistent. "Why are you fighting me? Do you want to spend your last years drowning in bills and paperwork in hospitals?" I stopped, turning to face her. "I'd rather drown with dignity than float on your mercy." Her eyes flashed. "You think the court will believe you over me?" "I'm younger, sharper. I have connections. You have old papers and your word." "Old papers," I said, stepping closer to her window, "and a truth that doesn't fade. That's all I need." She leaned, in her voice a hiss. "You should have just signed it over willingly. You're only delaying the inevitable." And then, with a smirk, she drove off tires, spitting gravel like venom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the shadows stretch across my lawn. I thought of Martha, of her steady hands sorting bills, her voice calming me when numbers felt like enemies. I whispered to her ghost, "She's not just after money, Martha. She wants to erase me before my story's finished." The house felt colder than ever. But somewhere in that cold, I found steel. If Emily wanted to play with signatures, I'd give her one she could never fake. 2 weeks later, Jacobs and I met again. He had a gleam in his eye. "We've got her," he said. "The handwriting expert is ready to testify." "And the notary," he cracked. "Said Emily paid him under the table to rubber stamp the documents." I let out a long breath. "So it's fraud, black and white." "Fraud and conspiracy," Jacobs said. "Enough to sink her if we press charges." "Not yet," I replied. Jacobs frowned. "Not yet, Jack. She's trying to ruin you." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "And she'll try again. If we strike too soon, she'll find another angle. I want her to be overconfident. I want her to believe she's winning. Then we take everything in one blow." That weekend, Emily came by the house unexpectedly. She stood at my porch with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought maybe we could talk," she said. I stepped aside. She walked in, glancing around like she already owned the place. "Dad," she began, "I know things have been tense, but you need to see this from my side. I'm only trying to protect you. You're old. You forget things." I stared at her. The only thing I forgot, Emily, was how far greed can twist someone I raised. Her smile faltered. I continued, calm but sharp. "You can steal my signature. You can whisper lies. But you can't rewrite the truth. And you can't kill a man who refuses to stop breathing." Her face hardened. "Then I guess we'll see how long you keep breathing." She turned and left. The door clicked shut like a gavel. That night I sat again at my desk, pen in hand. But this time I wasn't just journaling. I was planning. Emily had made her move. Now it was my turn. The idea came to me in the quiet hours of the night. Sitting at my desk, the house wrapped in silence, I realized the only way to outmaneuver Emily was to give her something to chase. A decoy. A bone too tempting for her to ignore. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out an old leather folder. Inside were stock certificates from the late 1980s, most of them worthless after the crash. But to someone hungry and careless, they might look like gold. I smiled faintly. If she wants to bleed me dry, let's see how fast she runs toward a vein that's already empty. The next morning I visited Jacobs. "You're serious?" he asked, raising his eyebrows as I laid the certificates on his desk. "Dead serious," I said. "We let her think I've been hiding a fortune all these years, something she can't resist. I want her to reveal herself." Jacobs leaned back. "It's risky. If she catches on, she won't." I cut in. "Emily believes she's smarter than me. She always has. That arrogance will blind her." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we plant the seed. But you'll need to act vulnerable, make her think you're slipping." I gave a cold smile. "That won't be hard. She already sees me as half gone." That weekend, Emily came by again, this time uninvited. She carried a bag of groceries, performing the role of a dutiful daughter. "Thought you could use some help," she said, setting them on the counter. I played along, moving slower than usual, letting my breath hitch just enough for her to notice. "Emily," I said, lowering myself into the chair, "there's something I've been meaning to sort out. Some old accounts. Stocks from back when your mother was alive. They've been sitting untouched for decades." Her eyes flickered quick as a spark. "Stocks," she repeated casually. "Yes. I never told anyone, not even Jacobs. They might be worth something now. I've been too tired to check." I let the silence hang, then added, "I'd like you to help me with them. After all, you're better with computers." She tried to hide it, but I saw her pulse quicken in the hollow of her throat. "Of course, Dad," she said smoothly. "I'll look into it for you." Later that night, I phoned Jacobs. "She took the bait," I said. He chuckled darkly. Now we watched the fish swim. In the following days, Emily grew bolder. She stopped pretending to care about my health and began asking pointed questions. "Where exactly are those stock papers, Dad?" "In the study," I said vaguely. "Somewhere in that old folder. I can't recall which drawer." She would linger there longer each visit, rifling through files when she thought I wasn't looking. Once I caught her standing over the folder, her fingers brushing the certificates as though they were relics of a treasure chest. "You shouldn't strain yourself with old paperwork," she said quickly when she saw me watching. I nodded. "You're right, that's why I trust you." The real twist came a week later. Richard Hale, her father-in-law, the man nearly killed by those poisoned cigars, called me from the hospital. His voice was weak but clear. "Jack, Emily came to see me," he said. My grip tightened on the phone. "What did she want?" "She asked me about your old business ventures. Said she was helping you get your finances in order." "Jack, she wasn't asking like family. She was digging like a gravedigger." I closed my eyes. The pieces were falling exactly where I thought they would. "Richard," I said softly, "don't tell her more than she already knows. And for God's sake, don't smoke anything she gives you." He gave a strained laugh that turned into a cough. "Don't worry, I learned my lesson." The next Sunday, Emily invited me to dinner at her house. "Just a simple meal," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed sweetness. I arrived to find her table perfectly set, candles glowing. Her husband Daniel barely spoke, his eyes darting nervously between us. I could tell he knew more than he dared to say. Emily poured me wine, though she knew I rarely drank. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. I sipped but did not swallow. Instead, I let the liquid touch my lips before setting the glass down. "So Emily," I said calmly, "have you had any luck with those old stocks?" She leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Yes, Dad. I think they could be worth a lot. Enough to make things easier for you. For all of us." Her smile widened, but there was hunger behind it, sharp as teeth. Daniel dropped his fork with a clatter. Emily shot him a glare that could slice through bone. I tilted my head. "Daniel, you seem uneasy," he stammered. It's just hot in here." Emily's hand clamped over his. "He's fine. We're all fine." That night back at home, I wrote in my journal, "She's chasing shadows, mistaking them for gold." But Daniel knows. He's cracking. And when he does, the whole facade will collapse. 2 days later, Jacobs called me in. He had intercepted a request Emily filed with the bank. She had tried to use her power of attorney documents to gain access to the supposed stock accounts. Except Jacobs said waiving the papers she used the forged signature again. And this time we've got timestamp surveillance and handwriting analysis all aligned. I let out a long breath. She's tightening the noose around her neck. Jacobs nodded. 1 or 2 more steps and we'll have enough to not only clear your name, but bury hers in court. But the real revelation came unexpectedly. Late one evening, Daniel knocked on my door. He stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes filled with something between fear and shame. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "I can't keep this in anymore. Emily, she told me everything. She said once you're gone, she gets everything. Insurance, property, even those stocks. And she said if I don't back her, I'll be left with nothing." I studied him, my silence pressing heavier than any question. Finally, he whispered, "She's planning something else. Something soon. And I think you should be careful." I let him sit in my study while I brewed coffee. The man trembled, his hands shaking as he clutched the mug. "She isn't the woman I married," he said. "She's obsessed, Jack. Obsessed with what you have, not who you are." I leaned forward, my voice steady as stone. "Daniel, the only way to stop her is to let her expose herself. I need you to hold steady a little longer. Can you do that?" He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Good," I said. "Because when she finally reaches for the kill, I'll be waiting." The warning Daniel gave me replayed in my mind for days. She's planning something else. Something soon. His voice cracked with fear, and I knew he wasn't exaggerating. I didn't have to wait long. 2 mornings later, I found a new pill bottle sitting on my kitchen counter. Amber glass white cap neatly labeled with my name. Except I hadn't seen that doctor in years and I hadn't ordered any prescription. I held it up to the light. The pills inside were off-white, chalky, unmarked. Not the standard tablets. A coldness spread through me. She's escalating. Instead of discarding it, I slipped the bottle into an envelope and drove it straight to Jacobs. He didn't even open it. "We'll run a test. Don't touch another one." I nodded. My chest was tight, not from illness this time, but from anger. She's not just greedy anymore, Jacobs. She's reckless. That makes her dangerous. That evening, Richard called from the hospital again. His voice was frail, but his words carried weight. "Jack," he rasped. Emily came again. "Asked about your insurance. Pressed me to tell her if you still had policies active. She said the word payout." I closed my eyes. Insurance. So that was her angle. She wanted me gone officially legally so she could collect. "Richard," I said firmly, "do not meet her alone again. Ever." He chuckled weakly. "Don't worry. Next time I'll let the nurses send her out." I spent that night at my desk, writing in my journal, the lamplight trembling over the page. How did I get here? A daughter who once clung to my hand at the zoo begging for ice cream. A girl who cried when I left for business trips. Now the same woman who poisons cigars, tampers with medicine, and talks about payouts as if I'm a policy, not her father. For the first time, I felt grief, not just for my wife who had passed years before, but for the daughter I'd lost long before death had touched me. The next day, Jacobs called. His tone was sharper than usual. The pills, he said, came back positive. Rat poison. Crushed and pressed into a capsule. 1 or 2 might not kill you right away, but enough in your system and your lungs would give out. Perfect cover story, pneumonia returning. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "So she wants me to look like I died of natural causes." Jacobs paused. "Jack, we need to act soon. She's already crossed the line into attempted murder." I let the silence stretch, then said, "Not yet. She has to show her hand completely. If we strike too early, she'll twist it. Say I was confused, senile. She'll walk away. No. She has to bury herself with her shovel." That Sunday, Emily invited me over again. This time she insisted on cooking. "I've been learning some new recipes," she said brightly on the phone. "You'll love it, Dad. A hearty stew. Good for your lungs." The words made my stomach turn. At Jacob's urging, I alerted the police. Quietly, they agreed to place a recording device on me hidden in my jacket button. They also wired a small camera in my glasses undetectable. I felt absurd, like an old man playing spy games. But then I thought of Richard collapsing, gasping for air, of Daniel trembling at my doorstep, of the pill bottle on my counter, and absurdity vanished, replaced by resolve. Her home smelled of rosemary and garlic. A pot simmered on the stove, steam curling into the air. Emily moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed she was already victorious. "Sit, Dad," she said warmly. "Dinner will be ready in 10. I lowered myself into the chair, adjusting my glasses just enough to angle the lens toward the counter. My eyes caught a small vial beside the cutting board, unlabeled. She ladled the stew into bowls, humming softly. Then, as if choreographed, she sprinkled a pinch of powder from the vial into mine. Not hers, not Daniel's, mine. My heart hammered, but my face stayed still. "Here you go," she said sweetly, setting it before me. Daniel's hands fidgeted in his lap. His eyes darted between me and the bowl. He opened his mouth and closed it, his jaw trembling. "Go ahead, Dad," Emily urged. "It's good for you." I lifted the spoon, letting it hover just above the surface. The camera caught it all. Then I set it down. "Emily," I said quietly, "why don't you take the first bite?" Her smile faltered just slightly. "Oh, Dad, it's made just for you. You need it more." Daniel's fork clattered onto the table. His voice cracked. "Stop it, Emily. Just stop." She froze, her eyes blazing. "What are you talking about?" He pushed his chair back. "I can't keep covering for you. He knows. Everyone knows." Emily's face drained of color. Then she turned to me, her voice dripping venom. "You set me up." I met her gaze, steady as stone. "No, Emily, you set yourself up." She stormed away from the table, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The door to the kitchen slammed. I sat there in the silence that followed, Daniel shaking the untouched bowl of stew cooling in front of me. When I finally rose, I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing tonight." He nodded, tears brimming. I don't know what happens now." Now, I said, my voice cold but calm. "Now we let the law take its course, but Emily doesn't know it yet. She still thinks she has a chance. And that's exactly what will finish her." That night back home, I wrote again in my journal. "The trap is nearly closed. She tried to kill me with cigars, with pills, with food. Each time she failed. But failure has only sharpened her desperation. Soon she'll try one last time. And when she does, the world will see her for who she truly is." I set the pen down, staring at the quiet of my study. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. I had thought the storm had passed after the poisoned food, but silence has its way of whispering threats. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. At first, I told myself it was nothing, stray animals, the wind shifting the branches, but then I saw the headlights crawl across my walls, slow and searching, as if someone out there wanted to remind me that they hadn't finished their work. I didn't move. I sat in the dark, breathing shallowly, and for the first time in years, I understood how it feels when the danger doesn't come with noise but with patience. That was Emily's way. She had inherited my steadiness, my quiet nature, but she'd twisted it into a weapon. The next morning, I called Detective Morales. My hand ached from gripping the phone so hard, but my voice stayed level. I told him what I had seen, the car circling my house, the lights cutting my sleep open. He wanted to push for a warrant, right? Then said it was intimidation, said she was escalating. But I told him not yet. Emily hadn't shown her final hand. If we cornered her too early, she'd find a way to explain it all away. Coincidence. Misunderstanding. She'd smile that sharp smile and twist the story until I was the paranoid old man. I couldn't afford that. So I asked him for one more move, one more thread to let her hang herself with. He didn't like it. He said I was gambling with my own life. I told him it wasn't gambling. It was patience. Later that afternoon, Daniel came to me. He looked worse than before. Eyes rimmed red, shoulders slumped, the weight of secrets dragging him down. The moment he stepped inside, he whispered, "She knows I talked." I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same place Emily used to sit with her homework, and I asked him to tell me everything. He said she had screamed at him, called him a traitor, and told him he had ruined their lives. She hadn't slept in days. She paced the house, checked numbers, and made phone calls at odd hours. Then he said the words that froze my blood yesterday. She asked him to check my car. She wanted him to make sure the brakes were still working. I felt the silence wrap around us. I asked him to repeat it, and he did, voice breaking. She wanted to make sure that when I drove, the car would take me downhill and never stop. She wasn't talking about the past anymore. She was planning the end. Daniel broke down at my table, sobbing into his hands, saying she told him once it was over she would be free. Free of debt. Free of me. And then the insurance. Always the insurance. I laid a hand on his shoulder and told him the truth he couldn't say aloud. She wasn't asking for freedom, she was asking for my death. That night I went into the garage. The sedan sat quietly in the dim light as it always had, loyal in its silence. 15 years of service, vacations, grocery runs, even nights when Emily had once begged me for ice cream, laughing in the passenger seat. Now the same hood was meant to become my coffin. I looked at my reflection in the windshield, old tired lungs rattling faintly but still alive. She thought my weakness made me easy prey. She forgot who taught her patience in the first place. I called Jacobs again. I told him to wire the car, every inch of it. Bolts, lines, brakes. If she touched a single part, I wanted it on record. He said I had ice in my veins. I told him it wasn't ice. It was patience. 2 days later, patience rewarded me. I parked down the block and walked home through the shadows. From the trees, I had a clear view of my driveway. And there she was, Emily, my daughter, my blood. She crouched under the hood with a flashlight in her teeth, her hands moving with practiced certainty. She wasn't fumbling. She knew exactly what to cut. I stood there in the darkness, heart hammering, but face calm as the hidden lens above the garage captured every detail. For 20 minutes she worked, stopping only to wipe her hands on a rag. When she was finished, she stood over the car almost tenderly, like an artist admiring her canvas. Then she slipped into her vehicle and drove away as if nothing had happened. I didn't move until her taillights disappeared. Then I walked to my car and placed my hand on the hood. The metal was still warm. My chest hurt, not with fear, but with memory. She used to sit here swinging her legs, begging me for sundaes, and now she had turned the same car into a death trap. I went back inside and sat down, staring at the empty chair across the kitchen table. I had lost her long before this moment, but seeing her crouched in the driveway with that steady hand, it felt like burying her twice. The next morning, Jacobs called. His voice was clipped. She cut the brake line clean. If you'd driven downhill, you wouldn't have made it past the corner. I closed my eyes. It was enough. More than enough. They had her now. But instead of relief, I felt grief pressing against my ribs. Arresting her meant trials, headlines, and years in prison. My daughter, my Emily. Yet what choice did I have? Leaving her free meant my death. That evening I visited Richard in the hospital. He was pale, his body weakened, but his eyes carried the same sharpness I remembered from our younger years. I told him she had tampered with my car. His eyes closed. God help us, he murmured. She's going to destroy herself, I told him. She already had. He looked at me long and hard, then asked if I would testify against my daughter. I clenched my fists. I told him that if it was the only way to stay alive, I would. But more than survival, I wanted her to see the truth, to face what she had become. The following morning, Daniel returned, his face hollow, his voice scraped raw. He said she was waiting for me to drive that day. She believed it was over, that the car would finish what she started. He said she told him once it was done, she would finally breathe again. I looked him in the eye and told him that today she would learn what freedom costs. That night I prepared everything. The police had the footage. The car was wired, cameras hidden. My journal lay open in my lap as I wrote, tomorrow Emily faces the truth. Tomorrow she buries herself in the grave she dug for me. I closed the book and placed it on the table beside me. Then I whispered into the silence of the room, my voice steady, final, tomorrow. My daughter tries to kill me for the last time. Morning arrived, gray and heavy, the kind of sky that presses down on your shoulders before you even step outside. I knew it would be the day everything shifted. My coffee sat untouched on the table. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I was waiting. By 9 o'clock, Detective Morales' unmarked car was parked 2 houses down, hidden beneath the limbs of an old oak. Another sedan I didn't recognize idled farther back, officers inside with cameras trained on my driveway. Every move had been rehearsed, every angle prepared. All I had to do was play my part, an old man stepping into his car, unaware of what waited beneath the hood. But I wasn't unaware. I was wide awake. I dressed carefully, a pressed shirt, slacks, the leather shoes Emily had once given me for Father's Day. They had scuffs, now creases across the top, but I wore them anyway. I wanted her to see them, to remember that once she had been capable of love. When I stepped outside, the air smelled damp, almost metallic. My hands didn't shake. I walked to the car as if I were heading to the grocery store. As I opened the driver's side door, I glanced across the street. Emily's car had just turned the corner, crawling slowly toward me, her posture stiff behind the wheel. She parked half a block away. Too far to greet me, but close enough to watch. Her eyes locked on me. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather cold beneath me. For a moment I let myself remember the early years, Emily in the passenger seat, hair tangled by the wind, laughter spilling from her mouth as we drove with no destination. I let that image linger because I knew it was about to die. Then I turned the key. The engine roared smooth and steady. I eased the car forward just a few feet, enough to prove the point. And that's when the trap closed. Jacob's cruiser came alive, lights flashing, siren piercing the quiet street. The officers moved with precision, boxing her in before she had time to react. Emily's head jerked around, her face frozen between confusion and fear. She tried to start the car again, but the door was wrenched open. Her body pulled out, her arms pinned behind her back. "Emily Hale, you're under arrest for attempted murder," the officer's voice boomed. Her scream split the morning, not words, just raw, jagged sound. She twisted against the cuffs, eyes wild, searching for me. And when they finally locked onto mine, the betrayal cut both ways. "Dad," she shouted, tell them I didn't." But I couldn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. For a second, I almost wanted to believe her, to erase the footage, to burn the evidence. But then I remembered Richard gasping for air. I remembered Daniel's trembling voice. I remembered the brake line cut clean. I opened the door and stepped onto the driveway. My voice carried farther than I expected, steady, unbroken. "Emily, I said you tried to kill me." Her face collapsed as if the weight of those words finally broke something inside her. She didn't fight anymore. She sagged against the officers, staring at me with a mixture of rage and despair. The neighbors had begun to gather, murmuring from their lawns, pulling out their phones. I hated it, the spectacle of it all, but there was no hiding now. My private war had spilled into daylight. At the station, Jacobs walked me through the paperwork. The footage was solid, the cigars traced back to her. Daniel's testimony filled the gaps. She would face charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, reckless endangerment. The words sounded clinical, too clean for what she had done, but they carried weight. They meant accountability. That night, alone in my kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the empty chair across from me. The silence was worse than before. At least when she was free, I could imagine she might walk through the door again. Now she was caged, and the distance between us had become absolute. But the story wasn't over. Arrests are only beginnings. The trial would come, and with it, every buried secret would be dragged into the open. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courthouse, the oak benches polished to a shine, the air thick with whispers. Emily was led in her orange jumpsuit, stark against her pale skin. She refused to look at me. Her eyes stayed forward, jaw clenched. Daniel sat behind me, shoulders hunched, his guilt hanging like smoke. The prosecutor laid out the evidence in calm, methodical strokes: the poisoned cigars, the brake line footage, the bank statements showing her debt, the insurance policy naming her as beneficiary. Each piece fell into place like stones in a grave. Her lawyer tried to paint me as paranoid, delusional, a sick old man inventing stories to punish his daughter. But when the footage rolled, she crouched beneath my hood flashlight. In her teeth, the room went still. Even her lawyer had no words. Emily finally spoke. Her voice cracked, but her words were sharp. "I didn't want to kill you. I just wanted to be free." The prosecutor pressed free from what Ms. Hale and Emily's eyes flicked to me at last. From him. From always being second. From never being enough. He gave everything to everyone else, his friends, his job, his causes, but not to me. Never to me. Her words hit harder than the evidence, because buried inside the venom was a fragment of truth. I hadn't always been the father she needed. I had been distant at times, stubborn, focused on survival more than affection, and now that neglect had grown teeth. But neglect doesn't cut brake lines. When the court adjourned for the day, Daniel and I stepped outside into the cool evening air. He lit a cigarette, his hands shaking. "She's going to blame you until the end," he said quietly. I nodded. "And I'll carry it, because it's mine to carry. But her choices, those are hers alone." That night sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house felt like her footsteps. Every gust of wind is like her whisper. I walked the rooms, slowly touching the furniture, the photographs, the remnants of a family I thought would outlast me. And I wondered not for the first time if survival was victory or just another form of punishment. The trial stretched on. Witnesses called, experts testified. Neighbors recounted strange visits, late-night arguments, whispered threats. Each day the weight pressed heavier on my chest. And yet through it all I stayed. Because I had to. Because truth demanded a witness. When I took the stand, the courtroom hushed. I told them everything: the cigars Richard's collapse, the poisoned air in his living room, the car crouched in my driveway with my daughter's hands inside its heart. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I spoke as though I were writing my will. And when I stepped down, I caught Emily's eyes one last time. For a flicker I saw not rage, not hate, but fear, as if she finally understood the gravity of what she had done. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Court adjourned. Tomorrow, the verdict would come. I walked outside into the fading light, the courthouse steps cold beneath my shoes. The world felt suspended, as if holding its breath. Tomorrow would bring closure or another storm. But tonight I stood between past and future, an old man stripped bare by betrayal, waiting for justice to decide if it still remembered my name. The day of the sentencing felt colder than any winter I'd lived through. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, but beneath it was the sour tang of nerves and endings. Emily stood only a few feet away from me in the defendant's chair, wrists trembling though she kept her chin lifted. My daughter, the child I once carried on my shoulders, the girl who used to press her tiny hand into mine, was now waiting for a judge to decide how many years she would lose. When the sentence came, 15 years with the possibility of parole after 12, she barely flinched, but her eyes darted once toward me. For a moment, I thought I saw the little girl who once cried when her doll broke, who begged me to fix it. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a hollow stare, as if she had already locked herself away from this world. The gavel fell. The officers took her arms. Chains rattled softly as she was led away. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched the back of her head, the same dark hair her mother once had, until the courtroom doors swallowed her whole. People expected me to feel triumph, closure, maybe even relief. Instead, I felt the weight of years pressing harder. Justice had been served, yes. But justice does not hug you at night. Justice does not call you on your birthday. Justice does not erase the echo of betrayal in your blood. Afterward, Daniel walked beside me down the courthouse steps. He said nothing at first. Then quietly, "Dad, do you think she ever loved us? Or was it always about the money?" I paused, staring at the gray stone steps beneath my shoes. "She loved us once," I said, voice low. But somewhere along the line, she started loving what she thought she was owed more than who we were. Daniel swallowed his throat tight. He wanted to say more, I could feel it, but the words caught in his chest. Sometimes the silence between father and son says more than any speech. The weeks that followed felt strange, hollow. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I found myself waking early, making coffee for no one, setting out 2 mugs before realizing there was only me. The absence of Emily's voice, whether angry, distant, or sweet, rang louder than any presence ever could. But life does not pause out of respect for your grief. It moves steadily, relentlessly. Bills needed paying. The porch steps still creaked. The garden weeds didn't wait for me to mourn. So I began tending to them. I repaired the porch with my own hands. It took me 3 afternoons, hammer echoing in the silence. Each strike felt like an answer to the question, what do I do now? Then I planted tomatoes, peppers, and a row of beans. My hands sank into the soil, black and cool. Dirt under your nails is a simple grounding thing. It doesn't ask who betrayed you or why. It just asks for water, sun, and patience. And in return, it gives you something alive. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Turner from across the street waved one morning, then brought me soup. She sat with me on the porch talking about her late husband, how grief never truly leaves, but it becomes lighter when shared. For the first time in months, I felt seen not as the man whose daughter tried to kill him, but simply as Jack, her neighbor. Richard Hale, meanwhile, was recovering. The poison had nearly ended him, but he was stubborn. One afternoon, I saw him crossing my yard, leaning on a cane. He sat beside me without a word. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. "I owe you my life," he muttered. I shook my head. "You don't owe me. We were both victims of the same box." He chuckled dryly, coughed, then said, "Funny thing about almost dying, makes you notice small mercies. This breeze, for instance." We sat there in silence, listening to the leaves tremble in the wind. Survivors don't always need words. Sometimes we just need the quiet company of someone who understands. Daniel visited often. At first out of worry, I think. He'd find me in the garden, sleeves rolled dirt on my hands. "You're working too hard," he'd say. "Work is what keeps me breathing," I replied. One evening, after helping me stake the tomatoes, he lingered. His voice broke the twilight silence. "Dad, do you ever think about forgiving her?" I leaned on the shovel, sweat dripping down my temple. "Forgiveness isn't a switch, son. It's a slow erosion. Right now the wound's too raw. But maybe one day, maybe." He nodded, jaw tight. I could see the conflict in him. She was his sister, after all. Betrayal doesn't erase blood, but it tangles it into knots you can't undo. Time passed. Months slid into seasons. The tomatoes ripened sweet and red. The porch no longer groaned under my steps. I started volunteering at the local community center, fixing chairs, teaching kids how to sand wood, and reading aloud when their parents couldn't. There was something about those children, wide-eyed, hungry for attention, that tugged at a place inside me. Maybe it was guilt, maybe redemption, maybe both. Emily once sat with those same wide eyes, waiting for me to notice her. I did, but not enough. And I'll carry that truth until my last breath. Helping those kids didn't erase what happened, but it reminded me that presence, quiet, consistent presence, is more powerful than money gifts or promises. Did I think of Emily every day? Did I forgive her? Not fully, maybe never. Some nights I dreamed of her as a child, gripping my hand on the way to school, smiling when I told her a bad joke. In those dreams, she still loved me without calculation. Waking from them was always the hardest part. But over time I learned something: peace doesn't arrive like a storm breaking. It creeps in slowly, hidden in the ordinary, in the way a neighbor waves, in the laughter of children at the community center, in the taste of a homegrown tomato. Peace didn't come with the verdict. It came in these small, stubborn mercies. One autumn afternoon, Daniel and I sat on the porch, mugs of coffee, warming our hands. The garden stretched before us, leaves turning gold. "You seem lighter these days," he said. "Maybe I am," I answered. "Maybe I finally stopped asking why and started asking what now." He looked at me for a long time. Then quietly, "I'm glad you're still here, Dad." The words landed heavier than any gavel, warmer than any verdict. In that moment, I realized something: survival is not just about living through betrayal, it's about living beyond it. So can a man like me ever find peace after his daughter tried to erase him? Not the kind of peace that forgets. No, that's a fairy tale. But the kind of peace that lets you wake up, tend your garden, help a neighbor, laugh with your son. That peace is real. I've learned that betrayal may scar you, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. You carry the scar, yes, but you also carry on. And in the end, that is enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.